Hey guys, I'm Dan Swayzek and welcome to my wood shop. Today I'll be showing you how I built this record stand out of construction grade lumber. The principles that I show you here can be used to build any similar looking piece of furniture, whether it's a end table or a hallway table, all out of construction grade lumber, and make it look pretty nice in my opinion. Like I said, this will be a record stand. It'll get a record player on top, a couple speakers, and each one of these compartments will be holding all of the records. Stick around and I'll show you how I did it. Starting off, we're going to trim each one of our boards to rough length. So for this project I ended up choosing just construction grade pine. They're premium studs, so they're a bit straighter, they're a bit smoother. I actually went through the majority of the lumber pile and found quarter sawn. So I mean, it's going to look very nice when it's finally said and done, but we've got to get rid of the rough surface appearance first. So what we're going to do is we're going to joint two sides, run the third side through the planer to make two sides coplanar. Then we're going to take the fourth side and just clean it up with the table saw. Anyways, let's begin with the joiner. So with two sides jointed smooth, next step is to make the third flat side, or I guess it would be the second flat side, it's not an edge, second flat side coplanar with the side that we just jointed. So to do that, we'll use our surface planer. So after running all of our boards through the planer, we now have all of our boards to the same thickness. What that thickness is, I actually don't even know. It doesn't actually matter. What does matter is that they're all the same. What I was having trouble with though, and I just want to share this with you guys in case you guys run into the same thing, on these shorter boards, running them through my little, they call them lunchbox planers, I ended up getting some snipe at the rear end of the board. Now, you can go online and you can find several ways to address the issue, including making longer in-feed and out-feed tables for it. Perhaps my 2-foot in-feed and out-feed table wasn't long enough. There's talks of shimming up the out-feed table to help support the workpiece. As the board is running through the planer, when it exits the area where the front roller is making contact on the board, the only thing that's pushing down is the rear contact roller. And what can happen is if the front of the board isn't being supported properly by the outfeed table, the board will actually tip up ever so slightly, just enough to cause the rear end of the board to make contact with the cutter knives, and that gives you snipe. And just in case you don't know what snipe actually is or what it looks like, here's two boards that I ran through the planer. One of which does not have any snipe on it and it's perfectly straight. The other has some snipe at the end section, and you can see from here, from about this area here all the way to the end, it's actually got a little bit of a deeper cut on it that I don't actually want. See, I want all of my boards to have the same exact thickness throughout them. So there's a couple different techniques, like I said, to fix that. In my case, I purposely made all of my boards 3 inches longer than they're supposed to be. And when I look at my tape measure, where the snipe actually starts to happen is still within the area that's going to get cut off later when I glue up these into flat glued up panels. So in my case, I'm not actually going to fix my planer. I'll do that at a later point. But for now, it's just something to be concerned of, and either plan ahead by making your lumber a little bit longer to account for that. You end up with more waste, but it is technically a way to get around it for now. So now that all of our boards are jointed on two sides, and then the third side is planed, the fourth step here is to make them all the same width. So we're going to do that on the table saw. Like I said, the width doesn't actually matter. We just want them to be all the same width. Continuing on with our woodworking journey here, we're going to take each one of our boards and we're just going to sand these sharp corners down. After they came out of the table saw and off the jointer, these fibers are really delicate on the ends here. And so what we're going to do is just give them a gentle round over. Right around a 1/16 or so is what the final round over is going to be. And that's just to prevent these fibers from tearing off or from, creating splinters or what have you. So yeah, let's get started. I'm using 150 on a block for this, and just giving it a quick sanding, nothing crazy. Getting ready to do our glue up here. Lay out your boards in the style or manner that best suits the panel that you're trying to create. Once you do that, we're going to actually run each one of these faces, that'll be the glued face, back through the jointer one last time. The reason we're going to do that is we want to square up these edges perfectly to each other. Running them through the table saw, you're left with a little bit of a rougher finish than would be desired for a glue up of this size. So what we'll do is we'll label each one of our boards, and then we'll run them through the jointer. So looking at the end of each board a little bit closer here, number one, I want to point out this little scribble mark that I created here. And essentially what this is earlier on I was talking about how I was going to cut off the snipe. Now I made sure that I put the sniped direction, or the sniped end of the board, all on one end, so that way when I trim cut these to final length, I end up cutting them all off. Otherwise I'd end up with two over there, two over here, etc. Looking at how I labeled these though, I just create, just 1, 2, 3, 4 on each board. And then what I did is I wrote an I, an O, an I, an O, an I, and an O. And what that symbolizes is when I run this edge back through the jointer fence, if it's got an O on it, that means that this side of the board is going to be on the outside. An I is on the inside, so on and so forth. So O, outside, I, inside. And what this is basically going to force us to do without even thinking about it is these two faces will become perfectly in line with each other. So if your jointer fence was even a fraction of a degree off, this is going to account for that angle difference, and it's going to set it up perfectly so that way it makes a perfect glued joint every time without any thinking involved. So I highly recommend doing this before you do that one last pass in the joiner. Over at the joiner, we're going to take a look at each one of our boards, and if it has an O, like I said previously, we're going to face that so that way that's outside of the jointer fence. If it has an I, we're going to rotate the board however we have to so that way that's in towards the fence. And that will ensure that when we're done here, we end up with a perfectly seamless glue up. Let's begin. So because it's currently about 10 degrees outside, I welcome you to my basement. Anyways, continuing on with the build, what I've done is I've set up my clamps in a way to apply appropriate clamping pressure along all of our seams. And the way to figure that out is if you measure your width of your board and you take that width and essentially you multiply it by 2. That's how the math works. Each clamp is going to apply the width of your board times 2. That'll be the distance of clamping pressure that it applies. So what I've done here, because I know that my boards are roughly 3.5 inches wide, I've set my clamps to be, I should set them to be 7 inches apart. Now, all of my bottom clamps are set up to be 10 inches apart, but I'm going to be applying clamps in between each one of my bottom clamps. So effectively all of my clamps will be 5 inches apart. And what that is giving me is that's giving me just a little bit of overlap of clamping pressure in between the two bottom clamps. But lay out your boards exactly how you laid them out when you were in the shop. Get all the numbers in the exact sequence that you had. So that way all you have to do is you just flip up each one of your boards and you just apply glue to these 3 sides, flip them back down, slowly tighten all of your clamps, check it with a level, put on your top clamps, check it with a level, keep on checking it until you're satisfied, then you let it sit a couple hours. But yeah, let's get started. Now, you probably noticed that I'm using Titebond 3 in this application, and I wish I would tell you that it's for some special reason, but really I don't have any other glue right now, so this is the glue that I have, this is the glue that I'm going to use. If you want science behind it, I could make up a reason and say, well, this glue has a longer open time, which is true, but once again, it's the only glue I have on hand, so I'm using it. Little roller like this, it's actually, I believe it's an ink roller, works like a charm to spread the glue out quickly. Slowly start applying clamping pressure, 1 clamp at a time. Check it with our straight edge. Give it a little more pressure. Once you're satisfied with how it is in terms of straightness, go ahead and start to apply your upper clamps. And like I said, you don't want a lot of pressure here. Just enough to just gently start squeezing some glue out until we get these upper clamps on. Because what you'll end up doing is you'll end up curving your panel upwards by only clamping on the bottom first. So we really want to apply this pressure evenly. The other thing you may notice is each one of my pipe clamps, I ended up putting a little piece of tape on it, and that's just to prevent the black pipe from actually staining the boards. If any glue got onto them, it might transfer some black pipeness. Don't want any staining, that would be bad. Give it a quick check, see if we're satisfied with everything. So after your glue has set up for a little bit, one little trick that I learned is you can take just a standard drinking straw, and while this glue is just a little bit tacky, you can actually just take that drinking straw and just scrape off any of the squeeze out. So after our panels have sufficiently dried after the glue up, what we're going to do is trim them to length. What I'm using is I've got just a standard miter gauge. I put a little extension on it just to give me a little bit more support in this direction. And what I want to do is I want to just take off just a clean blades width on this edge over here. And then what we'll do is we'll transition that and then run it to final width using the fence. Let's get started. It's always a good idea after you make that squaring cut to actually check for square and make sure that the results that you got are what are acceptable to you. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to proceed and I'm going to trim that to width. Perfect. If your panel's too big to cut or trim on your table saw, you can get yourself one of these. It's a modified version of a track saw, basically. It just uses a standard circular saw that a lot of people have, and comes with a little guide that mounts onto the base of it, and it rides along this track that they have. Pretty cheap and effective way to do the track saw style cut, but for a fraction of the price. So now that we have our panels trimmed to final length, what we're going to do is cut a small dado groove on whichever side that you want to be on the inside. What we're doing is we're just creating a small little void to put some backer paneling in. But what I've done is off camera, I figured out exactly how far I want to go over in one direction, and then I know if I bring my line back over to 1/4 inch, I'll end up with my exact dado that I want. That's a 1/4 inch recessed, and then it's 1/2 inch depth. Let's get started. So that's the leftmost part of the groove. I'm going to figure out the rest of my panels, get all those cut with the same exact line. Then I'll move the fence over one time to 1/4 inch and finish and do one final pass. That way all of them are equal. With all the grooves cut, I'm going to slide the fence over to the 1/4 inch mark, and that will take care of the right side of my dado groove. Let's begin. For the two inner panels of this project, I'm actually cutting that same dado groove on both sides, so I can put a separate back panel in each of the 3 compartments. So these will get 2 cuts. So now that all the dado grooves on our smaller panels are finalized, we're going to start on the larger panels, which are going to make up the top and bottoms of our little side table or record stand in this case that we're building. What I've got laid out is I've got my router table set up in a way that I can do a stopped dado groove. I've recessed it in about 3/4 of an inch on either side, and I want that so that way when you're looking at the end final product, you won't see the dado cut that went through the end of this board, because these the end grain of this board is actually going to be exposed. So if I did this on the table saw, you would see that carve out and it wouldn't be so pretty. So we're going to do a stopped dado on the router table, and I'm using a 1/4 inch Dowel spiral bit. Just what I had on hand. Let's begin. Might help if we had some power. Just like that, we have our stopped dado. So continuing with our project, the next thing that we're going to want to do is cut all of our small little backer panels. I'm going to cut mine about 1/2 inch longer than I want them to be finished, and then I'll slap the fence back on and I'll give them their final cut. Let's get started. Now's a good time to check your rough size panels for square, because if they're not square, you can take a little off on the correct side to make them square. These look pretty good to me. Next thing we're going to do is sand down each one of our panels, and then also our back inserts, or back panels if you want to call them. We're going to sand them down with 120 and 150 on our random orbit sander to get them ready for assembly. This will make just the whole finishing process a heck of a lot easier if everything's already pre-sanded before we actually assemble it. Let's get started. So continuing on with our build here, I've got everything sanded. I've got all the inner pieces finished sanded as far as I'm going to take them. I took them up to 150. Off camera, I also did a technique called water popping. I sprayed all of my panels very lightly just with some generic water, left it to dry overnight, and then gave it a final sanding of just 150 on a hand block. And what that did is it raised all of the fibers of the wood actually, and then I trimmed them off. So when I go to finish, when I go to put stain on, and you put a liquid back onto this wood, it won't raise those fibers again on me. So I'll end up with a much smoother end product. But continuing on here, we still have some joinery to do. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be joining my vertical members to my horizontal members with something called Miller dowels. And basically what it is it's a variable stepped dowel, and it'll get a tapered drilled hole through down into my vertical piece, and then these dowels just get hammered in place. Just a little test fit there. I'll have to go through and I'll have to blow out each one of these holes that I create just to get all of the wood chips out before I actually apply glue to each one of these dowels and insert them in all the holes. I'll also be putting some glue just on the end grain and glue it to the face grain. It's not going to do a heck of a whole lot, but it makes me feel better and makes me sleep better at night, so I'm going to do it anyway. But let's begin. Now I was only able to drill out some of the holes, just due to the way that I had the clamps previously arranged to make sure everything was square and exactly how I wanted it. I had to skip a couple of those holes. That's okay for now. What I'll do is I'll get most of these dowels in place, get everything re-clamped in place again, and I can always put the dowels in tomorrow. So the trick with these dowels is you just want to put a nice layer of glue going down the dowel, so that way you get good contact all the way in that tapered hole that we just drilled. So I went ahead and got a little bit carried away actually, but I finished the top side, which is now at the bottom, completely, and I'm working on the bottom side. I've got all of my bottom dowels drilled and glued in place, and now it's time to trim them all flat. And so what I've got is I've got a little flush cut standard saw. I mean, you could pick up any style of these saws. They all work great, but we're just going to go along and flush cut all of these plugs, and then we'll finish off with some sanding and get this thing ready to get in stain. So let's begin. There's something just so satisfying about cutting off all these plugs. I don't know, it might just be me, but I'm loving this. Best part about all these little cut-off dowels is in a future project, if I end up using screws or something like that, I could actually take these little dowels and use them as just plugs. They'll work perfect for that, so I'm going to keep them around. I think they'll come in handy in a future project. With all of our dowels nicely trimmed, I'm just going to use some 150 on a small little block plane and just smooth out any leftover ridges that might be left. Could take this outside and use a power sander, but it's about 5 degrees out there, so we're going to stay inside for this one. So off camera, I went ahead and scratched a couple glue areas, and then I restained the entire piece of furniture. I also applied 3 coats of just wipe-on polyurethane. I ended up making my own out of some mineral spirits and just some floor grade general polyurethane. You mix the two about 50 to 50 by volume, and it turns into a great wipe-on varnish. Super easy to apply, but I went ahead and did the whole thing, coated it twice, ended up just gently scuffing that second coat, applied a third coat. I'm pretty happy with the results. It's ready to assemble. We're getting to the stage where we're going to start putting some legs on. And so what I got for legs is I chose just some generic hairpin legs here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-drill at each one of these locations, and I've got them marked out here. And just pre-drill for this very large screw. I don't want to try to send this screw in. It'll definitely just tear apart my hard work at this point. So we'll pre-drill and get these legs on and get this piece finalized and out of the shop. Good to go. Got all my holes drilled. I'm going to thread these in by hand. And there you have it, guys. It's a finished record stand. So the record player will go on top. Each one of these compartments is going to be used to store the actual records themselves. But these same principles that I've showed you here can be applied to pretty much any piece of furniture. It all comes down to the basics, how to properly join the boards together to make a panel, how to take those panels and assemble them into boxes, and then how to take those boxes and finish them to make them into a piece of furniture. But there you have it. It can be done. That's construction grade lumber, and I just made it look a little bit nicer. Thanks for watching.